The noon sun sat heavy over the town, hammering the dirt street into hard clay, baking the wooden boards of the saloon until they creaked like old bones. Dust swirled with each passing boot, settling on the shoulders of the men who had gathered near the platform. They had come for spectacle, for cruelty disguised as commerce. Wagons crowded the square, horses restless, while the air carried the mingled scents of sweat, whiskey, and something ranker, a sense of decay beneath the lively chatter. A few women watched from windows, their faces half hidden, while children peeked around corners until their mothers dragged them away. What stood on that platform today was not cattle, not mules, but 3 young girls pressed together, clinging as though the air might steal them apart. Elias Boone had not meant to stop. He had ridden into town only to collect feed and a coil of rope, nothing more, and yet his boots slowed against the pull of the crowd. He was a man whose face bore the desert's lines, weathered by years of sun and silence. His broad shoulders sagged beneath the weight of debts and ghosts, but his eyes, though dulled by whiskey nights and dust storms, still carried something like defiance. The people knew him, or thought they did. They whispered of the rancher who had lost everything: wife, child, land worth anything. They said he was cursed. He carried the whispers like another scar, tired to defend against them. The auctioneer's voice rose, sharp as a whip crack. 3 fine sisters, strong enough to work a house or field. Bid starts at $10. The words cut through the chatter, and a ripple of laughter followed. Men with sunburned faces and calloused hands leaned forward, eyes narrowing with crude appraisal. One licked his lips. Another muttered something that made those near him snicker. Elias stopped at the edge of the crowd, jaw tightening as his gaze moved to the children. The eldest, maybe 15, stood with her chin lifted, though her small body trembled. Her eyes were dark and cutting, already filled with suspicion, already grown beyond her years. One arm wrapped protectively around the second girl, who might have been 12, thin and pale with nervous fingers clutching a small wooden cross at her throat. The youngest, hardly 9, clung to both sisters, her face buried, shoulders shaking with confusion she could not name. They looked like sparrows thrust into a hawk's nest behind them. Watching with a satisfied smile stood the woman who had brought them. Agnes Crowley, stepmother to the girls, though she carried none of a mother's weight in her heart. Her dress was fine but worn at the seams, her hair pinned too tightly, her lips painted blood red against her pale, cold skin. She held herself with the pride of someone who had bartered decency long ago and found the trade worth the profit. When someone asked why she would sell them, she shrugged, saying mouths cost money and the girls were no kin of hers. The crowd accepted it with cruel ease, Elias's fists clenched at his sides, nails digging into calloused palms. He told himself to turn away. He had no business meddling in others' ruin. His ranch was near collapse, his cupboards nearly bare. He had spent too long surviving on scraps of pride and stubborn grit. 3 children would drown him faster than drought. Yet he could not pull his eyes from them, not with the memory pressing at his chest, the memory of his own sisters, swallowed years ago by fire and men's violence. Leaving only his guilt to survive, the auctioneer barked again. $10, do I hear 12? 12 for 3 able-bodied girls. A hand shot up. Another followed. The numbers climbed, though not high. They were bargaining for lives as if for sacks of flour. The eldest girl stiffened as a thick-set rancher in the front row smirked, lifting his bid. Elias felt his stomach twist. He saw in that man's grin the future. Those girls would meet labor without mercy, or worse, before reason could intervene. Before his own despair could remind him of debt and hunger, Elias heard his voice rise. 25. The crowd turned, murmuring. The auctioneer raised his brow, surprised. 25 from Boone. Do I hear 30? A pause followed, uneasy. A few men exchanged glances, but none raised their hand. The name Boone carried with it the rumor of ruin. No one wished to outbid a man already marked by misfortune. The silence stretched until the auctioneer snapped his gavel down. Sold. To Elias Boone. A wave of whispers swelled through the crowd. Some laughed, muttering crude jokes. Others shook their heads, pity mixing with ridicule. Boone, the failed cowboy, buying himself children? The girls did not move at first, uncertain, their wide eyes darting from Agnes to the man who had claimed them. Agnes stepped forward, her painted smile sharp as glass. "They're yours now, Boone," she said, voice dripping with contempt. "Hope you've got the stomach for 'em." She took his coins without hesitation. Already turning away, Elias stood in the churn of dust and voices, feeling the weight of the moment press into his chest like a brand. He had not saved himself, perhaps he had only doomed them all. Yet as he approached the girls, something softened in the eldest's gaze, something like defiance battling fear. She tightened her hold on her sisters, whispering to them before stepping down. Elias offered his hand. She did not take it. Still, she followed, dragging the others close beside her. The ride out of town was slow, the wagon wheels groaning beneath them. The girls sat huddled together in silence on the backboards, their dresses threadbare, their eyes wary, glancing at him only when they thought he wasn't looking. Elias guided the reins with hands heavy as stone. The sky above was bruised purple, the sun slipping westward, leaving behind a horizon streaked with fire. The prairie wind moved restless, carrying whispers of judgment and the smell of storm far off. For a long while no one spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon and the distant call of a crow. Elias thought of words he might say, but each felt brittle, false. He was no savior, no father, just a man too stubborn to let cruelty pass unchallenged. Yet as the road stretched before them and the land opened wide and endless, he felt a stirring he had not known in years, something like purpose, raw and dangerous. The eldest girl finally spoke, her voice low, meant only for her sisters but carried by the wind to him all the same. "Hold on tight," she whispered. "We don't know where he's taking us." Elias's chest tightened at the words, at the mistrust that cut deeper than any bullet. He did not turn, did not correct her. He only clicked the reins and drove them on toward his ranch, a place of ghosts and silence waiting to be filled. The prairie swallowed the town behind them, and ahead the land stretched wide, indifferent. Watching to see what sort of man Elias Boone would prove himself to be, the wagon rolled into the yard at dusk. The sky a bruised canvas where clouds dragged their shadows low across the land. Elias Boone's ranch crouched at the edge of prairie grass, half living, half forsaken. Fence posts leaned like drunks, the barn door sagged on rusted hinges, and weeds claimed the path to the house. A once proud place, now hollowed by time and neglect. He halted the team, the horses blowing hard, their flanks slick with sweat. The three sisters sat rigid in the wagon bed, their bodies pressed together, their silence louder than words. Elias climbed down, boots crunching the dirt. He gestured to the house, but they didn't move. The eldest girl stared back at him, chin lifted, daring him to force them. He felt the weight of her gaze. It was the same look he'd once given men who aimed rifles at him. He didn't press. Instead, he carried the feed sack inside, the door groaning as though it resented being opened. Dust drifted through the air, stirred by his boots. The house smelled of wood rot and memory, every board holding the echo of his failures. He set the sack down, then returned to the wagon. The girls had not moved. "Inside," he said at last, voice roughened by disuse. The eldest Marin, he recalled hearing at the auction, hesitated before sliding down, pulling her sisters with her. Unia clutched the little cross at her throat, lips moving silently. The youngest Bess held her sister's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. They followed him like shadows, wary and unwilling. The kitchen table bore the scars of years, knife grooves, spilled whiskey, candle burns. Elias lit a lamp, its glow throwing long shadows against the walls. He set down bowls, filled them with what little stew he'd managed to scrape together that morning. The smell of salt pork and beans filled the air, thin and unwelcoming. The girls sat close, hands in their laps, waiting. Elias sat opposite, the lamplight carving his face into planes of shadow and grit. They ate in silence. The scrape of spoons against tin was the only sound, punctuated by the wind rattling the loose shutters. Elias watched them through lowered lashes. Marin ate slowly, every movement deliberate, her gaze cutting to him between bites as though measuring what kind of man he was. Unia bowed her head, whispering grace before lifting her spoon. Bess shoveled quickly, hunger stronger than fear, though her eyes darted about the room as if the walls might close in. Ilias's chest tightened at the sight. He had not sat at a table with children since he forced the memory down, swallowing it with his food. Afterward, he showed them the narrow room off the hall. It had once belonged to his wife's sister, long gone. A single iron bed stood there, thin mattress, quilt faded to pale threads. Marin pressed her lips tight, guiding her sisters onto it, and they huddled together as if the world could reach them even in sleep. Elias lingered at the doorway, searching for something to say. Nothing came. He closed the door softly. That night he sat by the cold hearth, staring into the empty grate. The house creaked, settling, each sound carrying memory. He could almost hear his wife's laughter, see the small wooden cradle that had never held life. The ghosts pressed close. Upstairs floorboards whispered beneath the girls' cautious steps. Their presence felt like trespass, yet also like air rushing into a suffocating room. He did not sleep. At dawn, chores pulled them into rhythm. Elias worked the corral, hauling hay, fixing the water trough. To his surprise, Marin appeared, sleeves rolled up, her sisters behind her. She said nothing, only lifted a pitchfork. He nodded once. She worked with sharp efficiency, every move precise. Unia fed the chickens, quiet lips still moving with whispered prayers. Bess trailed the goats, giggling once when a kid butted her hand. Elias caught the sound, sudden and light, cutting through the stillness like a bell. He looked away before it could touch him too deeply. Word of their presence spread quickly. By week's end, men at the saloon muttered, eyes narrowing when Elias entered. Boone bought himself a family, one spat, his grin full of rot. Another laughed, or bought trouble. 3 mouths to feed, 3 reasons to go under faster. Elias ignored them, though the words cut deep. He was used to being judged, but now the weight pressed heavier, because it wasn't just his ruin anymore. Agnes Crowley returned one evening, wagon rattling down his path like a curse carried on wheels. She stepped down, skirts brushing the dirt, eyes sharp with greed. "They doing all right?" she asked sweetly, voice dripping false concern. Elias stiffened. The girls had gathered at the window, pale faces watching. Agnes tilted her head, smile sharp. "You'll owe me again soon, Boone. Those girls cost more than your pride." She'd let the words hang before climbing back into her wagon. Her departure left the air fouled. Elias felt the girl's stares burn into his back, as if asking silently, "Will you protect us?" That night, he found himself leaving bread at their door, unable to face them directly. He placed the small loaf on a plate, tapped once, and walked away before they answered. He told himself it was for their comfort, but he knew it was his own shame that kept him from meeting their eyes. The storm came 2 nights later. Lightning tearing across the horizon, thunder shaking the beams of the old house. Rain hammered the roof, water slipping through cracks. The girls huddled under the quilt, whispering prayers. Elias sat by the hearth with a rifle across his lap, listening to the storm as though it carried voices. The house groaned with every gust. He thought of the words spoken in town, of Annis's threats, of the debt looming like a shadow he could not outrun. The girls were under his roof now. Safety was a word too fragile for this land. Toward midnight, the storm eased, leaving only the dripping eaves and the smell of wet earth. Elias rose, weary, and checked the doors, the windows, each lock secure. He paused outside the girls' room, hand hovering at the doorframe. From inside, he heard Marin's voice, low and steady. "Don't be scared. We'll keep together. Don't matter where he takes us, we keep together." Elias's throat tightened at the words, raw as a wound. He stepped away before they could hear him, for his silence betrayed him again. When morning came, the air smelled of washed soil, fresh but heavy. Elias saddled his horse and rode the fence line. From the ridge, he looked back at the ranch, the house standing against the open sky, smoke rising thin from the chimney. 3 small figures moved about the yard, tending animals, their hair catching the sunlight. Something stirred deep in his chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome hope, fragile as glass, dangerous as fire. He turned his horse back, the land stretching wide around him, whispering of trials yet to come. The days turned long, stitched together by silence and work. Elias Boone rose before dawn, his body moving through chores like a machine wound by old habit. Yet now, wherever he went, there were smaller footsteps behind him. Marin took to the yard with a rifle slung awkwardly across her shoulder, learning the weight of it beneath his watchful eye. Her hands shook at first, but her gaze never faltered. Sharp as a hawk's, Unia preferred the stables, where she whispered to the horses, her prayers soft as breath, as though speaking with them was safer than speaking with people. Little Bess followed wherever Elias set his boots, her chatter occasional. Her eyes wide with questions she rarely dared to voice. The unease between them had thinned but not vanished. Every meal was still quiet, the clink of cutlery filling the gaps where words should have been. Marin watched him with the same guarded suspicion, though sometimes her brow softened when he showed her how to steady her aim. Unia lowered her head in his presence, offering only short replies, though he caught her staring at him once in the lamplight, as if measuring whether the man before her was a protector or a jailer. And Bess, in her innocence, had begun tugging his sleeve when frightened. A gesture he accepted without knowing how to return, but beyond the fragile trust forming within the walls of his house. The land carried a different story. Boot prints were found by the creek one morning, fresh and deep in the mud. A horse's shoe mark, unfamiliar, pressed into the dirt. Elias stood long over them, the water lapping at his boots, the wind tugging at his coat. Trouble moved closer, and it smelled of men who hunted weakness. By evening, rumors had traveled faster than dust on the wind. At the saloon, he heard his name spoken with scorn. "Boone's got himself a brood now," a man sneered. "Ain't right, keeping girls like that under his roof. Won't be long before someone teaches him manners." Laughter followed, coarse and ugly. Elias kept his hand steady on his glass, though his insides twisted. The town had always treated him as an outcast, but now their malice sharpened, their eyes turning toward the girls. When he rode home that night, every shadow seemed thicker, every rustle in the grass louder. He could almost hear their voices carried on the wind, a promise of violence yet to come. Agnes appeared again the next day, her wagon drawn by a bony horse, her smile painted wider than before. She stepped down with the grace of a snake shedding its skin. "You think keeping them makes you righteous, Boone?" she taunted, eyes glittering. "A man like you can't even keep his land. You'll starve before winter's end, and when you do, maybe I'll be waiting to pick up what's left." Her words dripped poison, and though he did not reply, his silence was answer enough. She smirked and leaned closer. "There are men who'll pay more than you did. Men who'll come knocking." With that, she left dust trailing behind her like a curse carried away on wind. That night, Elias's sleep broke into fragments, restless with visions. He saw fire sweeping across a valley, heard the screams of innocence from years past, the ones his orders had condemned. Faces twisted in agony, the weight of guilt crushing his chest until he woke, gasping in the dark. He rose, staring out the window where the prairie stretched endless and indifferent. The girls slept down the hall, their breath soft, unaware of the man who carried blood on his hands. Protecting them might be his chance to set something right, but it could also be his final undoing. One evening, as the sun fell in copper light, Marin lingered near the porch steps, rifle in hand. She had overheard men in town. Elias knew by the way her eyes burned when she asked, "Do you regret it? Taking us?" Her voice trembled, though she fought to steady it. For a long moment he said nothing, the truth tangled in his throat. At last he answered, voice low, "I regret everything I lost, not you." Her eyes widened, and though her lips pressed thin, she did not look away. A crack had formed in her suspicion, faint but there. Days stretched into a tension that hummed in the bones. Horses grew restless at night, their cries sharp in the dark. Unia claimed she smelled smoke on the wind, though no fire showed on the horizon. Elias checked the fences each morning, finding them tampered with, Rails loosened as though by unseen hands. Someone circled them, testing the edges. One dawn. A riderless horse appeared near the tree line, its reins trailing, flanks streaked with sweat. Elias approached slowly, hand on his gun. The animal's eyes rolled white, fear carved into its posture. It was a sign, and he knew it. Somewhere close, men were waiting. That night, he sat by the hearth with his shotgun across his knees. The girls had been sent to bed, though he doubted they slept. Every creak of the house set his nerves on edge. The prairie outside lay silent, unnaturally so, as if the land itself held its breath. He stared into the fire until his eyes blurred, thoughts churning like storm clouds. He was no stranger to violence, but this was different. This was not for land, nor money, nor pride. This was for 3 children who had chosen him, however unwillingly, as their shield. Outside, wind shifted, carrying with it a faint smell gunpowder, distant but undeniable. Elias rose, moving to the window. The horizon loomed dark storm. Clouds gathering, the land crouched on the edge of something inevitable. He gripped the shotgun tighter, jaw set. Trouble had found them, just as Agnes promised. And he knew with unshakable certainty that before long, the prairie would run red again. The night pressed close, alive with silence. Upstairs he heard a floorboard groan, a child shifting in her sleep. Elias Boone stood alone in the flickering firelight, a man haunted by his past, braced for a future that promised blood. Somewhere beyond the fence line, riders waited, their presence like thunder before the strike. The storm had not yet broken, but its first growl shivered through the earth. The night arrived like a held breath. The air was too still. The sky stretched taut with clouds that hid the moon. Elias Boone stood on the porch, shotgun across his arms, listening. The prairie offered no sound of coyote or owl. Silence meant danger. Behind him, the girls huddled in the dim glow of the lamp, their faces pale, their eyes wide. He had told them to stay inside, but the fear in their gaze said they knew what was coming. The first torchlight flickered at the ridge, then another. Figures on horseback crested the rise, dark silhouettes against the sky. They moved with purpose, spreading wide, cutting off every escape. Elias's jaw tightened. He had counted on trouble, but seeing it made the weight real. Step back. Inside, closed the door, and checked the shells in his gun. Moran stood near the table, the rifle he'd taught her to use clutched to her chest. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. Unia knelt beside Bess, whispering prayers that shook with her breath. Elias met Marin's stare, saw both fear and defiance, and gave a single nod. She swallowed hard and returned it. The first shout tore across the yard, rough and jeering. "Boone, send out the girls, and we'll let you live." Laughter followed, coarse and cruel. Boots hit the ground, men dismounting. The crunch of gravel drew closer. Elias breathed deep, feeling the weight of every ghost behind him. He had failed before, failed to protect, failed to save. Tonight he would not. The door shuddered as a man's boot struck it. Another torch flew through the air, landing in the trough where it hissed and died. Their threats grew louder. Elias raised the shotgun, his voice carrying through the wood. "You'll not have them." Silence followed for a beat. Then the crack of gunfire shattered the night. The windows splintered, shards raining onto the floor. The girls screamed, ducking low. Elias fired back through the broken frame, his shot tearing into the dark. A cry answered, one man down. Chaos erupted. Torches arced through the air, landing against the barn, flames licking at dry wood. Men rushed forward, their faces smeared in firelight, eyes glinting with hunger. Elias's gun roared, each blast lighting the room with savage brilliance. Marin dropped to her knee, rifle braced, and fired. Her first shot struck the dirt, but her second found its mark, spinning a man backward into the dust. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but her hands steadied with each pull of the trigger. Unia dragged Bess toward the cellar door, shoving her inside as bullets ripped through the walls. Elias fought at the doorway, blood stinging his arm where a round had grazed him. He reloaded with grim precision, every motion an oath. He saw. Their faces in flashes, men he half knew from saloons, men he had once ridden beside in younger, darker days. Now they came for him, or rather for what he sheltered, and then Agnes emerged from the firelight. She strode into the yard with her painted lips curled, voice cutting through the din. "They don't belong to you, Boone. Step aside." She had brought them here. Leah saw it plain in her eyes. The men obeyed her like wolves following a wounded leader. She raised her arm, pointing toward the door. "Take them." One outlaw lunged forward, torch raised, teeth bared. He reached for the cellar where Bess cowered, and for a heartbeat, Elias's chest went hollow, certain he'd fail again. But Agnes moved suddenly, shoving the man back. Her face twisted with something Elias could not name: guilt, fury, or a shred of the humanity she'd long buried. The outlaw cursed, turning on her. A shot rang out. Agnes crumpled, blood blooming. Across her dress, her lips parting as though she meant to speak, her eyes caught Elias's once, and then she was gone. The moment shattered what control the outlaws had. Some faltered, shaken by the betrayal. Others roared with rage. Elias seized it. He stepped into the open, shotgun blazing, his roar carrying above the thunder of gunfire. Marin fired beside him, her young face streaked with soot, eyes alight with fierce determination. Together they drove the men back, bullets cutting the night. One by one the attackers fell or fled, their shadows swallowed by the prairie. When silence returned, it was broken only by the crackle of flames devouring the barn. Elias dropped to his knees, chest heaving, blood running warm down his arm. Marin stood over him, rifle still clutched tight, her breath ragged but steady. Unia emerged from the cellar, pulling Bess close. Their eyes were wide, shining not just with fear but with something harder: belief. The dawn found them on the porch, smoke rising from the ruined barn, the prairie stretching endless before them. The house still stood, battered but unbroken. Elias sat with his back against the post, his wounds bound clumsily by Unia's trembling hands. The girls pressed close, their small bodies warm against his side. Marin leaned her rifle against the wall, settling near him. Her voice, quiet but firm, broke the silence. The words struck him harder than any bullet. He swallowed, his throat raw, and placed a hand on her shoulder. Unia lifted her little cross and laid it in his palm, a silent offering, a fragile trust. Bess curled against his chest, her breath evening as she drifted to sleep. Elias looked out at the horizon, where the first light spread across the land, painting it in gold. He had no illusions there would be more storms, more battles to come. But in that moment, with their weight against him, and the sun rising steady, he felt something he had thought long dead. Purpose. The prairie wind carried away the smell of smoke and blood, leaving behind only the vast silence of survival. Elias Boone, once broken, sat among the children he had saved. And for the first time in years, the land seemed to forgive him.